I'm very glad that we have with us here today Dr. Srikanta Panigrahi and Dr. Dubash. Dr. Srikanta is the Director General of Carbon Minus and has worked extensively with the Government of India, the Ministry of Environment, Forest and Climate Change, the MEA, the International Treaties Division, the United Nations Environment Programme, and the World Bank in implementing the Kyoto Protocol in India and framing the National Action Plan on Climate Change. He was also an advisor to the Planning Commission and helped draft India's intended nationally determined contributions for the Paris Climate Accord. So he's deeply involved in issues of climate change, natural resource policy, energy, sustainable development, and also was part of a national action plan for operationalizing the clean development mechanism in India. He's been conferred the National Science Popularization Award for his extraordinary contributions and commitment to popularize science amongst the masses, and is also a member of several other high-powered government committees, including the National Strategic Knowledge and Mission on Climate Change. So we're very privileged to have you here today, Dr. Panigrahi. So if you could come up on stage, and then I'll introduce Dr. Dubash as well. Dr. Dubash, too, is very well known amongst any of you who's familiar with climate policy. He's a senior fellow at the Center for Policy Research here in New Delhi and the coordinator of the Initiative on Climate, Energy and Environment. His research and policy interests include climate change policy and civil society, participation in global environmental governance. He's published a number of books on climate change and the regulatory state in India, and was conferred the T.N. Khushu Memorial Award, the 12th Memorial Award, in recognition of the impact of his work on Indian climate change policy. We're very glad to have you here as well. Please, if both of you could come up on stage. So I'll briefly explain the format of the dialogues for this evening. So I'll speak for a couple of minutes on the topic for today, which is the impact of the US's withdrawal from the Paris Climate Accord. Let our speakers have 10 to 15 minutes each, and then sort of open the floor up to discussion. I mean, the idea is for it to be as interactive and participatory as possible, so please feel free to chime in with questions. There'll be plenty of time for everyone. So to set the context for today's discussion, we have here two rather brilliant cartoons that my colleague Shruti unearthed today. And they give you an excellent context of our topic for today. So the one on the left is a cartoon that appeared in the New York Times at the time at which the Paris Accord was initially signed. And obviously it's showing India being a roadblock to the implementation of a successful climate change, a global climate change agreement. The tables have turned, and how. So we come June 2017, and you have Trump pulling out of the climate accord and, well, as this cartoon shows, taking a metaphorical dump over global climate policy. So the questions then for today are, what do we do with this mess? What does this mess mean for India? How dirty does it make it for us? How do we clean it up? What's the role that we play in cleaning it up? So to put it in more technical terms, I suppose what we'd like the speakers to address today is what are the implications of this, not just the implications of the US's withdrawal, not just on, well, as in there could be physical impacts of this on climate change for India, especially given its vulnerable population. There could be financial implications because of the US's withdrawal of commitment to financial aid for technology transfer to developing countries like us. And there are implications and opportunities for global climate leadership as well. So what's the kind of leadership role that India should play in the diplomatic sphere as far as climate change is concerned? So it'll be great if the speakers could address some of these issues, and of course we'd love to have questions from the audience as well. So if I'd like to ask Dr. Panigrahi to begin, please, first.
I will express my deep thankfulness to Vidhi Center for Law for inviting us in this auspicious occasion to discuss on very important topic, which is timely and very pertinent. Um, I have also joined before this in public debates in Lok Sabha television, Rajya Sabha television, and Doordarshan. And this is a magazine, Invention Intelligence. I have a thorough analysis published in this. This is a publication by Ministry of Science and Technology, National NRDC. So, coming to the today's topic, that is ramification for India and its commitment under Paris Agreement, given recent developments involving the exit of USA. I will say ramification for India is there, but it is not significant. It is not that adversely affect India, but while discussing Dhwani ma'am recently spell out the various areas, so far as technical transfer is concerned, technology transfer is concerned, there will be very little impact, not very significant impact. So far as finance is concerned, there will be not at all any impact. But one of the major impact, India cannot think in isolation in climate change issues. Climate change is something which is beyond borders. We all are a part of one world, and this world, or the only planet, the only earth, is our home. So in a home there are so many brothers and sisters. One brother is rich, one brother is poor. So normally family members expect a rich brother to do more for the family. But if he doesn't do, he cannot be punished. Even a least earning member can take the parents and keep them with him and take care of them. So there are many such instances in our daily day-to-day life. So so far as before coming to the debate, we need to understand some basic things. Like if you see the emissions, the greenhouse gases, there are 6 greenhouse gases. I'm not going into fundamentals. All these 6 greenhouse gases are converted into carbon dioxide equivalent and expressed in that unit. So far as carbon dioxide is concerned, greenhouse gases are concerned, the highest greenhouse gas emission China makes at present. And China makes roughly 27% of the global greenhouse gas emission. Whereas USA is the second largest emitter of the greenhouse gases, around 15%. And India's contribution in global greenhouse gas emission is around 7%. And European Union's contribution is around 10%. Some scientist or some statistician or the general people say India is the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases, because they don't consider European Union as a single country. It is a association of countries, so they don't include it, European Union in the while listing the polluters list. But some people go by statistics and they say 10% is more than 7%. So third largest emitter is European Union, and fourth is the India. Then fifth comes Russia. So these are the emission profile. If you see the USA's emissions, say the USA is a country who has a, you all know what kind of lifestyle a normal US citizen lives, and how much amount of carbon those kind of lifestyle creates or contributes. In 1992 Earth Summit, the bigger Bush, not the recent George Bush, the other one, who was the president of USA at that time, he told that whatever may be the case, USA cannot compromise with its living standards. It will keep going and it will enhance. There is no question of coming down. Environment is next, living style is first. That was his view. And so if you see the historic data analysis, like in climate change, common but differential responsibilities, and there are many jargons and equity for which India and other developing country claim on carbon space on per capita basis. Because of time constraint, I am not going to explain you all this. I understand you all know that those terms. So USA is the historically largest emitter of the greenhouse gases. Now recently China's development profile has increased, and China has taken over in overall emission, greenhouse gas emission in comparison to USA. But if you see the historical analysis, the total amount of emission since the Industrial Revolution, USA will come first. Next, now also, in today's date, per capita emission profile, USA has got much more per capita emission, greenhouse gas emission than the Chinese, because China has a population figure, higher population figure. So when in per capita terms, China's emission is even lesser than USA. Those figures are available with me. What is India's, China's and USA's profile. And this article had done a detailed comparative analysis of these three countries, their perspective of the past, present and future. Now USA is one of the economic superpower, although the rate of economic growth has declined, but it is still one of the economic superpowers. It has got the highest greenhouse gas emission level even today, and second largest emitter of greenhouse gases, contributing 15% of the global carbon emission or greenhouse gases. Total in terms of billion tons, it is around 500 plus tons USA emits, out of which USA has also mitigates through some of the proactive action measures, climate action measures. So roughly around 300 billion tons needs to be addressed. So scientists say if USA is working out all of a sudden from the protocol or the agreement, then this burden of 300 billion tons, will the other country will share or it will remain unattended? And it has a great link with the basic objectives and framework of the Paris Agreement. And I understand all of you understand that. Telling you in brief, what is Paris Agreement? Paris Agreement brings all the nations on a common platform to undertake best possible efforts to combat climate change and mitigate global warming and to adapt to its effects with enhanced support to assist developing countries. This is UNFCCC's definition. So the Paris Agreement came because Kyoto Protocol failed. I hope all of you know about Kyoto Protocol. Kyoto Protocol, we have won since when the Earth Summit was done in 1992. Since then, we had three conventions, major conventions: UN FCCC, UN CCD, and UN Convention for Biological Diversity (CBD). So, coming to the UN FCCC, every conventions does their COP, Conference of Parties. India has hosted COP 8, which we were instrumental to do it in India, in New Delhi. So on climate change. So in Conference of Parties 3 in Kyoto, in Japan, the Kyoto Protocol came. And protocol identified 41 industrialized nations who contribute largely to greenhouse gases emissions. And it was taken a decision that those who are contributing largely to the greenhouse gases in per capita term, because carbon space and equity and right issues were taken in Kyoto Protocol, so they have to mitigate greenhouse gases. They will have a target, and and all those details I am not going. 5.2% of 1990 level, all were. Then it come into force on 16 February 2005. But ultimately the Kyoto Protocol could not achieve it during its first commitment period. Then from 1st January 2013, it is in second commitment period. The Canada and Japan worked out. Then subsequently many countries worked out. Now it has become ineffective and not likely to achieve its target, although it is there till 31st December 2020. The Paris Agreement will start operationalizing from 1st of January 2021. And so now it has not yet started. Many people think it is under implementation now, so that you should know. So the basic objective of Paris Agreement is to achieve 2 degree, to restrict the temperature rise beyond 2 degree of the pre-industrial time, and pursue its effect to hold the increase under 1.5 degree Celsius. 2 degree is the objective, but अगर हो सकता है कुछ ज़्यादा aggressive measure लेके 1.5 degree Celsius में, it is better. So it is also expected that some of the country will be more aggressive and help in achieving 1.5 degree. Because more the temperature rises, you know the consequence. I am not discussing the adverse impact of climate change. So when such a bigger player having substantial amount of greenhouse gas emissions like USA is working out all of a sudden, it has certainly has certain implications, and it will have the implications at the global scale. So if somebody is emitting greenhouse gases in USA, it is also affecting to a person in India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or Bhutan. And if a person is emitting greenhouse gases in India, it is also affecting a citizen of USA. It is one atmosphere we have. We cannot restrict them in boundaries. So the implications to the planet, not the implications to the individual countries and territories. Although India is one of the country which is reeling under severe climate change adverse impacts because of poverty. The more you are poor, more you are vulnerable to climate change, and even you will not in a position to adapt to the climate situation and manage the things. In India, the adverse impacts, you know, the agricultural productivities are going on. The rainfall pattern has become different. The same amount of rainfall is there, but it is raining. Number of rainy days has reduced, and there is a lot of unexpected rain in less number of rainy days, causing floods, flash floods. Sea level rise, we are impacting. If you see this data, water quality and quantity that is scarcity of water has come up as one of the great challenges to the nation. So, India is one of the country which is suffering a lot because of climate change in terms of natural calamities, in terms of agricultural production, in terms of temperature rise and extinction of species, in terms of reduction in food production, in terms of rise in temperature and sea level rise and whatnot. So, so implications are there, and now since it is a program by Vidhi, and Vidhi is a legal policy institute, I must discuss the legal implications of the USA walking out from Paris Agreement. The US President Donald Trump asked his EPA chief, Stuart Pitte, to work out and examine how US early can exit from Paris Agreement. And there was a lot of legal consultation, and they arrived at two options. One option, if they walk out from Paris Agreement, then as per the rule of the book, it will take minimum 3 years. They cannot walk out before 3 years, because they have not only signed the Paris Agreement, they have also ratified the Paris Agreement. And when we organized Conference of Parties 8 in New Delhi, we were wearing a badge. We have ratified Kyoto Protocol. Do you? Because USA had not ratified Kyoto Protocol at that time. And when at the Kyoto, there was a lot of diplomatic and geopolitical pressure on USA. At that time, Bill Clinton was the president, that USA should come and sign the Kyoto Protocol at Kyoto. But politicians have their own decisions, and Clinton, although was pleading that he is in favor of Kyoto Protocol, but actually he was not very supportive, and till last moment there was no action. And Al Gore, the deputy president, who is really committed for environment, influenced Clinton, and so Clinton told him, go and sign the agreement. And at the 12th Kyoto Protocol's period was extended for one more day, and he has to fly, Al Gore has to fly to sign Kyoto Protocol. But neither in later days USA ratified Kyoto Protocol, so automatically USA is out from the game. But when you sign the ratification, you have legal binding responsibility, which even Barack Obama in his first term of 4 years was not very, he was also rolling the time, passing the time, and but in second period, when the Paris Agreement come in his second term, he was one of the architects of Paris Climate Change Conference, and he also influenced and pleaded the case with US Congress, and ultimately ratified Paris Agreement. Now, once you have ratified, you cannot walk out, and if you walk out, minimum 3 years will be required. And in this case, already more than 6 months of Trump has gone, and plus 3, it becomes 3.5 years, whereas his total life period, presidency's period, is 4 years. So it is not known if he will be re-elected again, and normally Republican presidents don't get elected second time. So if he is not coming, maybe the new president who will come, he will again try to will agree to Kyoto Protocol. So ultimately it will be a temporary hurdles, and so this kind of analysis are there in different publications and analysis. So now before concluding my talk, I would like to say that Paris, the another legal implications will be President Trump was advised that if USA walks out from UNFCCC, then it will be very easier. So automatically Paris is gone. And because USA is a signatory to UNFCCC and to one of its agreement, Paris agreement. So walking out from Paris agreement will be taking more time. So instead of the shortcut and easiest way to walk away from UNFCCC, so that will reduce time and help USA a lot. Trump got a lot of criticism throughout the world, diplomatically from his own people, from its governors, states, who told what I am not telling, and how India reacted. I would like to say, you must have read how Indian Prime Minister reacted. India is known for committed for environment, and our culture and our commitment to environment is more than 5,000 years old, and we will take care of the rights of our future generation. And so also the External Affairs Minister Sushma Swaraj ji and Harshvardhan ji, who was in now Environment Minister in charge, who was in Beijing in 8th ministerial energy ministerial conference, they have all told in India's commitment. So now walking out from climate change commitments, historically if we will see the information and data, USA by heart was never committed, and Barack Obama is an exception, and that also his level of engagement was also very limited in the time of Paris conference only and agreements only. So whole world is looking at East, particularly India and China, and we have a very promising, articulating and aspiring NDC, national intended nationally determined contributions, which become NDC after getting approved in the Paris agreements. And our energy, solar and other renewable energy commitments, and all are well known. I hope you know that, which is more aggressive than USA and China. And so I have the figures of comparison of three national determined contributions of these three countries, and what they have exactly do. So my times is in fact off, so I cannot continue more. I would like to, I believe in dialogue and discussion more, we will learn a lot from each other.
Thanks very much. That was a really comprehensive historical account, as well as given us lots of information on data related to climate emissions as well. Perhaps before I hand over to you, there's a couple of points I wanted to highlight from Dr. Panigrahi's speech. One thing that popped out was him saying that there was going to be no financial implications. I was wondering whether this is perhaps because the US wasn't going to do very much under the Paris Accord anyway. And he also had a...
Should I reply to that?
No, so we'll maybe let Dr. Dubash take that one and continue the conversation in the audience part session. The other thing that he mentioned was that, we're all brothers and sisters, and there's not very much we can do to compel our profligate siblings from, in this case, reducing their emissions. But, we can cut off allowances, that's what parents do, ground them. So what are the other enforcement, the other ways in which you think the international community and India can step up to bring the US to a book, I suppose? Yeah.
Great, thank you very much, and thanks to Dr. Panigrahi. He's gone through a lot of material, so I can focus, taking a lot of ground as having been covered. First of all, that New York Times cartoon on the left there, our minister actually had at the time, Mr. Javadekar had a pretty good comeback when he was asked about this cartoon. He said, well, I don't know how you see the cartoon, but I see the Paris train running over the Indian elephant. So there's imagery, and that actually summarizes it very nicely. Is India sort of an obstacle? Is it being run over? This is kind of the tension at the heart of India's engagement in the climate talks, and it's if anything, to switch to the punchline, this whole episode with Mr. Trump, in a sense, completely changes the framework within which India is viewed in global climate politics. And so there's a sort of potential silver lining of sorts over here. Now, I have quite a lot to say, and I also believe in dialogue, so the only way to square the circle is to speak really fast. So I'm going to do that, but just stick up your hand if something is not clear, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
And seek a clarification, all right? So I'm going to go through a few things. One, factually, what did Trump do? So just to embellish a little bit what not embellish, but to elaborate on what Mr. Panigrahi said, Mr. Trump actually didn't withdraw from the Paris Agreement, right? Mr. Trump gave notice of intent to withdraw, and that too not formal notice, right? And he basically, the way the rule book works, you have a 3-year waiting period, followed by a 3-year notice period, followed by a 1-year waiting period. So actually, the US can only withdraw around November 4 years from now, right? So right around the time that the next presidential election will be held, basically guaranteeing that this will be a huge US election issue. So that's what he did. He did not choose to withdraw from the UNFCCC, as Dr. Panigrahi said, which is very important because the UNFCCC, that would be a more fundamental repudiation of the whole process. Also worth noting is the argumentation and the language he used, right? And this is what sort of galls a lot of climate junkies like myself, is that the argument was about the US being a victim of some sorts. And the whole preceding decade and a half or 2 decades, certainly since Kyoto, has been about the US, the international community, tying itself in knots to try and figure out how you could get something that was legally somewhat robust while creating space for the US political situation to actually be part of the process. And the way in which they squared that circle was to come up with this structure of pledges. Every country puts on the table its own pledge, right? So how can you be a victim if you put on the table your own pledge that you designed to meet your own political circumstances at home, right? And so despite that very loose formulation, and in fact that's why Paris has been criticized as being too weak, and you asked the question about, what sticks do we have? There are none. Basically, the Paris mechanism works in 2 ways. One, through sort of naming and shaming and reputational effects within countries. And the second, which often gets discounted, is by creating these pledges that then create hooks and levers for domestic regulatory processes, right? And including by providing information. So there's information, it's actually an information-based regulatory system at the global level, and it induces the formation of information-based regulatory systems at national levels. That's really what Paris does. Those are its claws, if you like. So that's the factual bit. What are the effects for India? Well, first of all, I think it is important to start with the observation that if we are able as a global community to solve climate change, it is very beneficial for India, and if we are not, it is very harmful for India. So India's interests do lie in an effective global response to climate change. And that actually tends to get underplayed. We think about climate change only as something that might restrict our access to coal and keep us, in the dark and without access to energy. But actually, there is a flip side to this, right? There is some issues about energy, but it is in India's interest to have an effective climate agreement. Obviously, best if we can have both. So what does it mean for this? Well, the biggest risk is that the whole Paris process unravels, right? So Paris has some, as I said, it's relatively toothless, but I am among those who is an optimist, and I think that the information-based regulatory regime at the global and national levels can have some effect. We already see it. Arguably in India, we would not have a national solar mission, we would not have a solar target, we would not have an energy efficiency mission, we would not have a lot of these things which were not mandated by the international process but have been induced by the international process. And the same is true in many other countries, right? So a few of us did a paper looking at the emergence of climate legislation and policy between 2009 and 2014, right? So roughly between Copenhagen and around Paris. And though nothing was required internationally, there has been a massive proliferation of domestic legislation and policy, right? So it's that inductive process that seems to be working. If you have a domino effect, if every country says, listen, the US is pulling out, they're the largest emitter in historic terms, second largest in absolute terms, among the largest in per capita terms, why should we continue? That would be a big problem. I actually don't see signs that that's going to happen. Because there is not, and it's partly because of what Trump has willfully misunderstood. There are no real downsides to staying in Paris. You have your domestic pledges. Most countries have pledged what they think they can manage within their own domestic political systems, keeping in mind their competitive interests, keeping in mind their energy needs. So what's the reason actually to pull out, right? Paris is meant to work as a virtuous circle where countries ramp up their pledges as they see climate mitigation becoming increasingly congruent with their domestic interests, right? So there's no particular downside to staying in Paris. And there is a downside politically, even if the US isn't going to scold them, the rest of the world will. And in particular, now China has sort of come on board. China and the EU were talking about a joint statement. India has reaffirmed, Brazil has reaffirmed. President Macron has proved himself to be the most deft new actor in terms of imagery and rhetoric on the political scene. He talked about making. Yes, sorry, you had a clarification.
Was there any financial implication personally for him that he withdrew?
Who, Mr. Trump?
That was some newspapers are saying.
Yes, he is telling that.
Well, I think Mr. Trump's financial holdings are beyond the scope of my information base. But my speculation would be that there would be some holdings that would be negatively affected by climate change and some holdings that would be negatively affected by efforts to mitigate climate change because he has a pretty big portfolio. And so how that comes out on balance, I couldn't say. I would guess that even Mr. Trump at this point would be driven more by political considerations than narrow personal financial considerations in this decision. That would be my speculation. Yeah. Yes. So Emmanuel Macron basically, with a riff on this "Make America Great Again" thing, basically talked about making the globe great again. I thought it was very clever, a very clever rhetorical turn. So I don't see that unraveling happening. That's the first point. Second point is, will we actually be less effective at mitigating because a large emitter is going to go slow, right? And that then has effects on the rest of the world. And it's important to note that even under President Obama, the US was not fully on track to meet its pledge. They were trying, and there was a sort of serious political will and political capital invested in it, but they weren't quite there yet. Some of those things are being rolled back in part by the Trump administration, but many of them he has not been able to roll back, like, for example, the methane rules. There's something called the Clean Power Plan, which he is planning to roll back, but many seasoned observers say the market forces are actually going to take over and the US will actually start moving further and further away from coal. So I don't think it's a dramatic effect. I think it's a question mark. But what you are seeing is political mobilization at the city level, at the community level, in many states. And there's sort of a political awakening around this issue. People are getting mobilized in ways that they haven't before. And I don't think you can actually predict how this will work out in terms of both emissions, but more important in terms of US political support around this issue. I think there's going to be a lot more debate and discussion going on. So I'm not too worried about that part of it. Financial. Okay, we got asked about the finance issues. You have to put this in context. Global climate finance debates have always had an Alice in Wonderland quality, right? India has insisted that whatever we do on climate, the rest of the world has to pay for because we didn't really cause the problem. Now, what about a public transport system like a bus rapid transport system? Is that a climate mitigation measure? Is that an urban livability measure? Is that a congestion measure? Is that an air quality measure? It's all of those things. Yeah. Are we not going to do it because we're not going to get money for it? No, obviously we're going to do it, right? But by saying that, we can get to draw the line on what we decide we will do for our own interests and not for others. Similarly, the donor countries turn around and say, well, look, we're giving you all this development assistance. Now we want to put some of it for climate. And the developing world says, no, development assistance and climate are very different things. Again, if you have a more resilient agricultural system, is that climate adaptation or is that development? It's very hard to draw the line. So there's been this real sense in which you can't draw a circle around climate finance in a distinct way. And so that definitional issue gets in the way of actually having agreement on how much money flows and for what. So the number that got put out at Paris was $100 billion a year, which is what developed countries would work towards, right? The US, and in the short run, it was supposed to be $10 billion. The US share of that was $3 billion. Just before Obama left, he plonked in $1 billion, right? So we're talking about $1 billion, which is what's on the table. $3 billion is supposed to be on the table. $100 billion, right? Some of which was private money. Only a fraction of which would come to India anyway, right? Nobody fully expects all this money to be flowing. On India's part, we do our part holding up our end of the Alice in Wonderland bargain, right? Our NDC said that mitigation needs of India would cost $834 billion for successful implementation, and adaptation needs another $206 billion. Now, despite the fact that this adds up to about $1.1 billion, we then said our total need is 1.5. So everybody's making up numbers. So climate finance is more about jostling for position than real money flowing. Remember, the only real money on the table is $1 billion from the US and $10 billion worldwide. We have asked for $834 billion and $206 billion. So is it going to make a material difference to us? Probably not. And the reason it won't is what I said at the beginning of this talking about finance, which is that a lot of what we do is also for development reasons. So India has a lot of interests in pursuing renewable energy for energy security reasons, for air pollution reasons, because we have mining communities suffering from coal mining, and so on and so forth. So we're not going to change that very much, right? So materially, I don't think finance is going to be such an issue. Last point I want to talk about is actually geopolitical. As I hinted at the beginning with reference to Mr. Javadekkar's comment here, which was actually quite clever, the heat is really off India. Until this happened, there was a real sense in which India was in a very, and I was very worried about this, a very dangerous place. India and some African countries, but they're much smaller, were pretty much the last countries left in the world that were going to dramatically ramp up coal production and use, right? China has basically maxed out on coal. The rest of the world is on a downward shift. And so even though it's deeply unfair because we're starting at a much lower base, there was a real sense in which, well, the NGO community was heating up and saying, well, if India builds all its coal-fired power plants, all bets are off, right? Two things have happened to take the heat off. One is we've suddenly decided we don't need so many coal-fired power plants for reasons that people in the energy community are actually quite confused about. Some are good reasons, some are bad reasons. We can talk about it in the discussion session. But also, the NGO community and researchers globally have kind of spun this situation around. And if you're going to beat up on the US, the way to do it is by talking about how the rest of the world is rallying. Yeah. And so there's lots of trumpeting about India's renewable energy targets suddenly. And we've become the good guys. We've become some climate villain to climate hero. And we were never either one of those things, and we're still not, right? The truth is somewhere in between. This is part of sort of the positioning and the narrative building game. But, we can bask in this for at least a few more years. The second point on the geopolitically is India now, as an aspirational global leader, along with China, has a platform to both act responsibly, talk the talk, and form alliances with other countries. Right? It's a very comfortable position to be in. China has also remade itself from being climate villain to climate hero. I think with a little bit more intentional strategy, frankly. We got lucky, but they actually planned this over a decade. But geopolitically, it creates a lot of space, especially with the US kind of evacuating that kind of moral high ground, which it never really had much claim to begin with. I think India is very well placed to form alliances and actually make climate change part of a larger foreign policy strategy that opens doors. I want to so I think in all these ways, whether it's climate effect, finance, and geopolitical, you don't see much material effect from the Trump decision on India, and you even see a few openings. Where I think there are some dangers from the point of view of the climate regime is actually Trump's narrative assault on some legal principles and some ideas. And it's very, very corrosive what he is doing, right? So we've always had tough negotiations with the US, but it has always been from a basic agreement on certain legal concepts, even though the interpretation of those was contested. And I want to spend a minute on this, in particular the idea of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities. Right? You have to
Particularly the idea.
common but differentiated responsibilities and respective capabilities. And everybody has to be able to repeat that at the end of this talk, because that's really kind of the bedrock. It goes further. The Chinese and the US got together and added at the end of that, in light of changing national circumstances. So that's actually the full clause. Now, CBDRRC, in short, basically says we all have a common responsibility to address this, but that is differentiated, right? And the basis of what is common and what is differentiated has been written about extensively. My colleague Ravani Rajamani did her PhD thesis on it and has continued writing on it, and will probably have a long and fruitful career with the continued interpretations. And it's very important. What Trump did basically was say, so pre-Trump, the argument was what is fair is determined by your interpretation of CBDRRC. Right? And the US had one interpretation, India had another one. And what Paris successfully did, by adding this clause in light of changing national circumstances, said CBDRRC is important, but we will each define it in ways that make sense to us, and we will self-opt into a pledge that is consistent with our interpretation of CBDRRC, so we can coexist with different definitions. Right? That was the fix. What Trump did is say Paris is unfair to the US, and unfairness has nothing to do with CBDRRC. It has to do with the fact that I'm not sure what it has to do with, but it's unfair. Literally, that was the level of argumentation, right? Yeah. So now you actually have, if you get into a situation of trying to accommodate the US, right? Previously, you know what you had to do to accommodate the US, accept their definition of CBDRRC. Now to accommodate the US, you don't even know what, it's actually floating free from the UN Framework Convention. It's floating free from all prior dialogues. And so the real risk is that at some point, and the US NGOs here, I fault some of the environmental NGOs here, they've been sort of urging the world to accommodate the US even now. And I think it's very important that not happen, because the corrosive effects on these core legal underpinnings will be devastating. You'll have to start all over again. So I think it's very important that the US is isolated on this issue. And where I have slight concerns is what India, in a foreign policy sense, seems to have done, is a don't ask, don't tell approach, right? We're not going to sort of call the US out. We are going to stand by our commitments, but we're not going to join with other allies. And so I'm a little worried that with some, there are smart people on the other side of the fence. Over time, this accommodation of the US shouldn't really take hold. I think it's very important that that not happen, because otherwise we won't really have a regime. So let me end with that and open the door for discussions.
Thanks very much. I think you did a wonderful job of breaking down a really complex issue. Yeah, I'd like to open the floor up. Maybe we'll take 3 questions at a time. Is that okay? And then you can sort of, if you could introduce yourself, keep the question really brief, and let us know if it's directed at one or the other of the panelists.
Dr. Dubash, my question is for you. You just mentioned that India should consider making climate change a cornerstone of its foreign policy. To that effect, is the current regime, is the current government actually inclined to do that? And if not, how, as policy advisors or people in the policy space, can we influence this decision making?
Someone else under
So
that.
you talked about the boom in renewable energy in India, and from what I understand, there's a major focus on solar energy, and the criticism is that it isn't as cost efficient as it is made out to be by the government. So do you have a position on the viability, the economic viability of solar power vis-a-vis other renewable options as well?
And I'll come to this room, in this half of the room in the second part. If you'd like to.
Yeah. So my name is Harsh Bajpai, and I'm a legislative assistant. So my question is to both the panelists, and it's related to climate change finance. So my question is that in Kyoto Protocol, we have 2 different annexes, Annex 1 and Annex 2, which talked about the developing countries and the developed countries. So I think so that through this Paris Accord, they have substituted it with INDCs. So now I want to know the change of role of the Global Environmental Facility Fund. Is there any change in the role of this GEF and the contribution made by the least developing countries in this? Because they can be real victims of this, because previously in Kyoto Protocol, the funding was done mostly by the developed countries. So what's the role of LDCs?
The contribution, the role of LDCs in what?
I see LDCs as real victims of this, so I want to know that previously, because the developing countries and developed countries funded LDCs, so now they have their own INDCs. So I want to know what's the role of LDCs in this context, and the role of GEF in this Global Environmental Facility Fund.
Would you like to have a first go at
Sure.
something?
So you called me out here because I think you put my position more strongly than I did. Should India make climate policy a cornerstone of its foreign policy? I think that's not how I would put it. I would say it's a very useful part of the menu. So, for example, right, when you're busy rattling sabers up in the northeast with China, and you find yourself on the same side on climate issues, right? I mean, this is the way diplomacy works. You find wedge issues where but we can use it in that sense. I mean, just giving an example. It's beyond my pay grade to know whether that's. I don't think at the moment anybody wants to talk about climate change up in the border regions. But when people try to find ways of cooling tempers, when we're trying to find strategic openings, climate change is a very useful arrow in your quiver that I think we should be using more strategically than we do. Renewable energy, the most recent bids for renewable energy, for solar energy, came in at 3 rupees and 23 paisa per unit. That is easily cost competitive with coal. Now, does that mean we can stop coal entirely? Probably not. There are all kinds of issues of dispatch, storage, etc., etc., etc. But the financiers have spoken. Nobody wants to finance coal in India anymore. So if you believe that there's a certain market logic, and I only partially believe in that, I think there's often an overcorrection. I think we're definitely in the range where renewable energy has got to the point of cost competitiveness much faster than anybody thought. And certainly the other sort of option that people politically keep talking about, nuclear, is far, far more expensive and has a much longer gestation and so on and so forth. So I think renewable is sort of here. I'm not sure that it's here to stay. There'll be or rather, I'm not sure there won't be any more hiccups. There will be. But no, this is the cost per unit, 3 rupees 23 paisa of solar, and wind is only a little bit more. So I definitely think the question is not whether solar and wind are going to start taking a bigger piece of the pie, but when and under what conditions at this point. The finance set of questions, the complicated set of questions. So yes, what happened is Annex 1 and non-Annex 1, in a sense, that was what the US didn't want for Paris. They didn't want these annexes, right? And so you had the pledge system allows you to basically self-declare, right? So Brazil and South Africa have actually come up with absolute pledges, which is what previously Annex 1 used to do. China and India have come up with intensity-based pledges. So there's not actually a cap, right? It depends on your GDP levels. And China is hybrid because they actually have a 2030 date by which they will peak, but not an amount. So yes, the annexes have been dissolved into this INDC structure. The GEF was always actually the World Bank's effort to get on the climate finance bandwagon, and it didn't really work because developing countries have set up a separate green climate fund. So the GEF will continue doing what it does. It won't get a great deal of money. For that matter, neither will the GCF, for the reasons that I explained, but the GCF will be more important than the GEF. We also have an adaptation fund, which LDCs successfully argued for and got, again with some amounts of money. And again, this is why it's not so salient for India, right? Because some adaptation money for a Tuvalu is going to be much more important than the same amount of money for an India. So I think India has never been well positioned to argue for some of those funds. So I think for some of the smaller, more vulnerable countries, there will be a fair amount of financing in the context of their economies, but it's not going to be dramatic. So they are somewhat hurt by this, but not very much. And I think the bigger issue is whether or not the mitigation effort is successful for those countries.
The adaptation fund came on the last day of the Paris talks.
Adaptation fund was preceded
Before.
that actually. Yeah.
Do you briefly want to address that last question, sir?
No, all the three questions I will address, but most of the things, whatever he has told, I agree in total. So I will not repeat those things. Only additional input where I feel I will add. Foreign policy and climate change. You cannot isolate climate change from take away from foreign policy. It's because climate change is involved in integratedly to the all sorts of every sectors of development, and also so it will be foolish to exclude climate change from public diplomacy or geopolitical issues. And our Prime Minister was very smart when on June 1st USA declared working out. He the kind of the things he declared, his statement in Russia and subsequently in France, you can understand how much diplomatic benefits we have accrued by those statements with comparison to our real climate action in the country. So, but you see the Prime Minister's recent US visit. US got tempted to supply coal and natural gas to India. US is very happy to get a partner, ambitious partner who is enhancing its energy portfolio. India is certainly interested in natural gas, particularly liquid LNG. But USA, there was a pressure from USA also to get the coal, and diplomatically India has accepted that. And if you see the outcome, there was a lot of non-profit and NGO sector protest why India didn't raise climate change issues with Donald Trump in his recent visit. but both the country in principle agreed to regard the climate change and accept its science, but not necessarily the other follow-up measures, and they then come to the energy security issues, and India also committed to go along with US in all of its renewable energy initiatives, including solar and all that. And so that's my take. Yeah, so you raised about renewable energy issues. Yes, pricing has is center staging renewable energy. And the market is center staging renewable energy because based on pricing. So market will automatically bring renewable energy. The coal will be thrown away. So the way the trend is going, but USA will be missing bus if some Trump factors will come in their historic evolution. So why all these are happening? Let it be George Bush or Trump, they all were backed by oil lobbies for their election funding. So they want to protect their business. So you cannot parallelly give equal importance to renewable energy market and fossil fuel market. If you push both together the way US posing now, it will ultimately a loser. The rest of the world will proceed smartly, and the center staging of renewable energy, which is a globally phenomenon that is taking place now, USA will left behind. Coming to the JEF, I was JEF focal point in the ministry for 9 years. JEF was created with a great hope, but JEF could not able to deliver many of the expectations of the least developed country or developing countries, and because of many reasons which I am not discussing now. Whatever financial kitties we are having, adaptation fund, green climate fund, JEF, all are peanuts. They are not going to help any small or bigger or middle, any kind sized country to any extent. Particularly for LDCs, there is a cross subsidy mechanism kind of thing, where developed nations more fund will flow to LDC, and developing countries funds almost remain same. Like whatever India contributes to these funds, a little lesser than that flows to India. But whatever developed country contributes, they hardly get 35% of that, because those amounts flow to LDCs. And in UN system like UNEP, World Bank, and any other, and JEF is those kind of created by UN system, but not effectively administered. So INDC, every country came up with their INDC, and now it has become NDCs, and they declared it based on their strength, like he told, based on their political system of their country, their financial strength and their capacity. They have designed it, what is the best they can do. Naturally, the smaller countries will not be able to do significantly for global climate change mitigation or adaptation. But at least to what extent they are able to address their issues, that is to be seen. That is what this agreement tells about. And rest of the, for rest, they will be needing support from the other stronger ones. And it is a subject of negotiations, which is a continuous process in the COP.
Thanks. Could I? Yes, Kevin. Yeah.
Hi, hi, my name is Kevin James and I'm from HNLU Raipur. My question basically is that since the US has withdrawn from this and since the US is like 10 to 14% emissions right now, so there is a big gap that is there in the current membership. So assuming that there is a scope for this leadership to be filled by other countries, my question is twofold. Number one, can India do significantly more in its pledges and all of that to kind of fill this void? And secondly, should India do more? Regarding the second question, since we are saying that the heat is off India and how India somehow finds itself in this place of climate hero, should it kind of rest in this place? Would it be more in India's interest to remain in this limelight? Or should we go like China and actually plan to take an even greater role for this?
Yeah, that's personal.
I myself, Ravinder Prasad. What I am like to say, the rich and elite, what they want, they have to do, and poor and weak have to suffer. What you told, sir, कि American President George Bush many years earlier told that कि American lifestyle is non-negotiable. Now Donald Trump is also doing this type of things, or he is saying he is fulfilling the interest of his own countrymen or own citizen. Then what leadership our country have to do? Yeah, what leader our country leader have to do so that their interest, their citizen interest will be fulfilled. Many years earlier, I read an article written by ex-finance minister of India, Jaswant Sinha. He told that India and Indian leadership have to sort out their own problem. Not they have to look towards America or developed country. No, so they have to take actions such that they can sort out their problems. After that, they are going to America and developed country, so they sort out the problem. You have to take actions such that, like this, what I like to say, they are fulfilling their own country interest. After that, you are going to purchase arms, you are going to purchase renewable energy. Why not you are diversify the business of the other country? So that, because you have no power to punish the Donald Trump, George Bush, but you can do business to other country also, so they will be pressurized.
Sure. So I think your question is clear. What leadership do we need for India to protect its own citizens? Here in the front row.
I wanted to know what are your views about the future of organizations like Green Climate Fund, which has just recently, set up just 7 years back and has started disbursing funds to African countries. And because resource mobilization, I think, is a very critical aspect in combating climate change. So do you think that GCF is leading towards a path towards dissolution, or, it's going to be ineffective, or, something as similar to Jeff? But where do you place the role of GCF in today's scenario?
Why don't you go ahead?
Hi. So interesting to see your thoughts, but I had a different view to it. So right after Trump's intent to withdrawal, we had the minister announce the clean coal mission. And keeping that in mind, we have NTPC and BHEL and even Coal India for that matter showing interest towards pushing towards RE in terms of changing power sector. So don't you think that in terms of ramifications, the resurgence of coal and the impact of and because of availability of clean coal technology, we could have that come back and our RE goals might not be met?
Sorry, maybe we'll just take a few answers and then one last round of questions. Would you like to split the two questions, perhaps?
Up to you.
Would like to answer any of these questions in particular, sir?
I'd like to do the first and the fourth.
Okay, sure. So maybe you could take the second and third one, the role of the Green Climate Fund and what leadership India needs to take to protect the interests of its own citizens.
Okay. Yeah. So our leaders have certainly a great responsibility to protect their citizens, and this is for what they are occupying the throne, and they are answerable to. But so far as global climate change negotiation process goes, every country has a negotiating team, and there are many national issues which are basically people's concerns and national problems and perspectives and all that. So based on those analysis, the interministerial consultation takes place, and there are some public consultation also sometimes organized to get the public views and opinions, and those are reflected in the negotiation, in the conference of parties. And there are many such issues. India is a country having more number of people. You will find, particularly the question was American lifestyle and Indian lifestyle. George Bush is telling lifestyle of US citizen is not negotiable. So is the value of an Indian citizen is much lesser than a citizen of a USA, and having he has taken birth in this planet with lesser privilege and rights. Is it true? No. Then how to protect that? So in the negotiation, there are arguments to protect, India and China argue on per capita basis. On per capita basis, India and China are still the countries having very least emissions, per capita greenhouse gas emissions basis. But the other countries, particularly the developed countries, say your industries, I mean Indian industries, are hiding their face behind the poorest of the poor of the nation. There are very poor people who are poor by birth and living a very neglected lifestyle, which and when you do per capita, those ones whose consumption level is much more, they accommodates their figures and statistics behind a poor skeleton. So that is the argument, and so these are the issues, and citizen consent are very important. And the most unfortunate part I would like to say that in India the citizens are not concerned about their rights and what they should ask from the leaders. They should learn demanding their rights, and let it be any field, so that the democracy will able to deliver them. Next is green carbon climate fund. As I told you before, this is another and it is the kind of the institutions. These are kind of the institutions those are created to make the poor fool by the riches. So the ultimate impact of these are negligible, and there are no peanuts. The real requirement is very huge. So these are IWAS systems.
Thank you, sir. Yeah.
So I just want to be quite clear in response to this first question about whether with the US withdrawing there's a vacuum that India could fill and so on and so forth. When I say that India could use and should use, in my view, climate change as a more in an elastic way as part of a larger foreign policy and with as an explicit foreign policy objective, that doesn't mean that I'm arguing that if the US fails to meet its pledge, that India should increase our pledge to take up the slack. Those are not the same thing, right? What I'm saying is that India should take a leadership role in buttressing and supporting the legal framework of Paris, its credibility and legitimacy, and this language, hard won, about CBDRRC, about bottom-up pledges which follow the national interest. I'm not saying that India should go beyond its own considered view of what its national interest is in order to plug some global hole, right? Very important distinction. What I am saying is that I do believe that the process that we have seen happening, where countries are increasingly going to see it as being in their interest to move to a low carbon future, that process will accelerate because as more countries go down that path, markets start reflecting it. They start pricing in a wider prevalence of regulatory measures that move in the direction of low carbon, and you end up having this virtuous cycle emerging, which then leads countries to reformulate their national interests. I'm saying that India should go along with that story and try and keep the momentum going behind it, not that India should set aside its national interests. Okay, so that's very important. What I have tried to argue is that I don't think that the US action is going to slow down that process very much. That might be a slightly bold statement, but in many arenas, particularly in the energy arena, I think that's true. So one other way you phrased the question was, should we do what China has done? What China has done is actually build coal like crazy, overbuild coal to have surplus capacity. They have a very inefficient economy in terms of energy efficiency, and they have a very inefficient economy in carbon terms. So that now they can basically declare themselves done, slowly unwind that inefficiency, and actually come across looking pretty good, right? So it's I'm certainly not suggesting that that's what we should do, and in fact it's too late for us to do that, and we can't do it for all kinds of reasons, not least that we just can't build as many plants as fast as China can because we're a messy and robust democracy. So on the and I would have it no other way. Let me be clear. On the gentleman here about coal, part of being a messy and robust democracy is that we can say multiple things at the same time, and often we don't get called out. The government doesn't get called out on it, right? So it was not so long ago that the government made a statement saying we would go from 600 billion tons of coal to 1.5 billion tons of coal by 2019, when our plants were running short of coal. That's a 2.5 times increase in coal. The draft National Electricity Policy that was released in December said we now have about 190 gigawatts of coal-fired power plants. We have 50 gigawatts more in the pipeline. And that's probably all we need until 2026, 2027. If we only need 50 gigawatts more, which is about 25% more, why do we need to increase our coal production by 2.5 times? Right? Numbers don't add up. Right? So the point is, nobody's quite clear on what's happening in the energy system. The suspicion is we probably need more coal, but no one's financing it. Renewable energy is ramping up, but we're not quite sure what it means for storage and integration with the system. It's a very uncertain transition period we're entering into. But I don't know too many people who think, and you talked about clean coal will only add to the cost of coal. If renewables is cost competitive with coal now, and maybe there's some frothy exuberance in the renewable energy market, maybe they're pricing it too low. But when you add on the cost of clean coal, it's certainly not going to be competitive with renewables if the trend continues. And the trend has been fairly steady downwards. So as I said, anybody who tells you they know with certainty what's going on in the energy market in India is probably, you should be a little cautious when you talk to that person. But I think that the broad tendencies are fairly clear. How they'll work themselves out in the next few years is a little bit more, you have to be a little bit more circumspect.
Thanks. Okay, we're running out. Sorry, sir. I think maybe we'll just take the last round of questions. Yeah, first gentleman at the back.
Yeah, my name is Manish Patnaik.
And please do try and keep your questions as brief as possible.
Yeah, what I heard, is Paris Accord really, is it meaningless, or, as it may be, each nation to its own? Say hypothetically, no nation complies. Can India afford not to comply with Paris Accord? Secondly, what are the penalties for not meeting Paris Accord? Nobody is talking about that. And again, what I heard is what bottom line benefits can ensue by using US walkout in negotiations, India's negotiation with US. Thank you.
The person here in the center.
Hello, sir. My name is Prakhar Singh. I'm a legislative assistant to Member of Parliament. So my question is that there's a strong correlation between the level of development and the growth rate in the emissions. So for a developing country like India, how far is it feasible to attain the level of development that the US or China has already attained without any significant level of increase in the emission rate? So is there a fair trade-off between the two, development and the rate of emissions? Thank you.
Hello, sir. So my question is that I want to understand this better. So the accord comes in applies after 2021. So I suppose there is some legislation that has to be done before in these 5 years gap. And so, do the states of United States can go ahead and do this without the central government doing anything? And the other question is that can in the worst case scenario, can we stay below the 2-degree ceiling without US?
Sure. And maybe one last question here. We're really running out of time. I'm sure the panelists will be happy to interact with you later.
Professor Panigrahi, the remark made by President Trump that India was being given billions and billions and billions of dollars, should I be comforted that this was just an American PECU version and there's nothing to be worried about? That's one to you. And to you, sir, in terms of, you had that interesting expression, information-based regulatory system at global level. Now, this interests me very much as it looks like a juristic mechanism model. So would you explain that, what you mean by information-based regulatory system working at global level? Because most of the regulatory systems that we've seen in jurisprudence and that we construct are not information-based. They are kind of value-based or equity-based. Yeah, and I'll be interested to hear on this model. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that actually ties up with the question about penalties in the Paris Accord as well. So maybe I'll let you go first, and then so you can answer the other.
Okay, so why don't I take the question first and the first and fourth questions together. To start with, whether the Paris Agreement is meaningless, and use that as a way to answer this question. No, in my view, it's not meaningless. I think the interesting, it was sort of an innovation in international law, and I'm not an international lawyer, so I'm sticking my neck out here in this crowd. But what Paris represented was sort of an inverse of what everybody thought would happen, right? The thought process was the only way to have a global collective action solution to a global collective action problem is to agree on a cap on how much greenhouse gases we have, allocate that across countries, and then set in place compliance mechanisms to make sure that everybody sticks to their share of the pie. That was the model everybody had in their head. And the big problem, of course, was that nobody could agree on who should get what share of the pie, right? So after 20 years of trying to debate that, we turned it around and said, all right, everybody, you tell us how much of the pie you want. It might add up to more than what we think we have in hand, but instead of doing an assessment ex ante, we'll do an assessment ex post. We'll say, you said you needed so much, did you use all of it? Mm-hmm. And if you don't think you used all of it, you didn't need all of it, next time around, give us a lower target. And over time, maybe there'll be a convergence because markets will see that globally, countries are serious about reducing emissions, right? And so that is the construct that Paris is built around, which is why there aren't any compliance mechanisms. And interestingly, Kyoto Protocol did have compliance mechanisms, and they were relatively ineffective. Mm-hmm. Canada essentially walked away from its commitment. So then, if it's just a bottom-up system, to what extent is it actually useful as a global mechanism? And the answer to that is this information-based, is the top-down elements, which are the information-based elements of a regulatory structure. So what every country agrees to in Paris, and these are legally binding, is not substantive obligations, but procedural obligations, right? They agree to submit to, and here's another acronym, it's easier than the last one, MRV, right? So monitoring, reporting, and verification of their emissions. So you agree to use the same protocols for example, how you convert the global warming potential of CO2 versus methane. So you can compare apples and apples. across countries. You agree to subject your domestic provisions and your pledge to a technical expert review every so often, right? To see if you have actually said what you said you're going to do. Are they going to be effective policies, and so on and so forth. You agree to subject yourself to an aggregate global stocktake. So every 5 years, the global community sits together and says, we're going to add up the numbers using a common accounting framework, and here's what it comes to. Right? So these are all procedures that are designed to flush out and make transparent what every country is doing. Right? So if you have a country that has relatively a lot of low-cost emission opportunities and doesn't take advantage of them, it'll become known. Right? And then there's a counterpart to that, which is at a domestic level, it'll induce transparency on numbers within the country. So you can have NGOs now saying, what about this potential or that potential? I mean, I've been part of a committee process which was very interesting in India, where there were disputed numbers on the amount of coal that was leaving mines and arriving at power plants. There were two different numbers, and the gap was really the theft. Now, the theft of coal. Now, in an international, when you have to submit that to an international process, you have to reconcile that pretty quickly. Similarly, China has had a lot of dodgy numbers which have now been subject to scrutiny, right? But you can also have domestic activists using those debates and numbers to argue about the implications of mining for communities, what that coal is being used for, and so on and so forth. Right? So in that sense, it is a transparency and information-based, driven, rather than based, it would be a better word, regulatory framework. Right? Sorry, it's a slightly long answer. And then I just want to make a quick point about this correlation on development and emissions. Yes, historically there has been a correlation between development and energy use, and between energy use and emissions. When you move to renewable energy, you're breaking that second linkage. When you increase your energy efficiency, you're breaking the first linkage. Right? Historically, the elasticity of GDP with regard to energy has been close to 1. India's had a strange services-led growth. It has been closer to 0.8 in India. So can you decouple those two things is a big part of the story. I think the answer is you can partially decouple, and you can do it slowly. But it would be very foolish for India to agree to anything that required a full decoupling, which is why India doesn't agree to a greenhouse gas pledge. We don't say our emissions will be 20% less than they were in 2005, or even that they'll be 20% more than they were in 2005. We say that the energy intensity of our GDP will go down.
30 to 35%.
Right? So our emissions can increase as of now indefinitely. All we're saying is for each unit of GDP, we will use less of emissions. Right? And that's probably something we want to do anyway, because it means a more efficient economy, it means a more technologically advanced economy, it means more energy security because we're importing less, and so on and so forth. Right?
The second question, I will just add to his answer. We have sustainable cities, zero carbon cities, inclusive cities at a city level. Even a country can be declared as carbon neutral, and so there is a certain process and mechanism to work out those. Take for the example of a city. City is considered as a parasite. It consumes everything, water, energy, and produces huge amount of waste. And so, how do you make the city zero waste city? So, how to manage everything and achieve neutrality? Such concepts are there also at a country level. And the most important thing is low carbon growth. You might have heard the low carbon economy. We need to decarbonize our development process, whatever possible, which he gave the example, and ultimately go towards neutrality. And so that is possible. But very aggressive policy framework and cooperation from all citizens and rigorous implementation mechanism is needed over a time period. Next is, what was the next question? Central government.
I think there was a question about what states in the US can do, and I think Dr. Dubash mentioned in his opening remarks that individual states in the US are taking greater initiative to.
In US, the states, the business houses, and even public and NGOs, they are all committed. The city administrations, municipalities, they all have declared their own action plans. And all the democratic, where the democratic governments are there in the states, the Washington DC, the California, New York City, and all these states have declared that they will be continuing along with their climate action, even if President declared to walk out. So also the people from other walk of life, and particularly the Barack Obama, the former president, has told that may not, even if Trump takes some decision, it is the states, it is the US business and US city administrators, and they will show that US can do more what it could have done being in the Paris Accord.
Okay.
And last question, sir has asked. No, this is not true, and there is, I don't find any such basis of it, and maybe some of the sycophants around him has impressed him based on some localized information, or I don't know. And Trump is a person who you analyze how he become the US president, and he was a businessman, and this great America first concept. So basically, he developed his own way of impressing people by taking populistic dialogues, and he is also confined with a limited circle, and so that is the reflection of that.
It's comforting to know that he was just being a pig and not.
Thank you very much to both our panelists. It was really an engaging discussion. We're very grateful you could spare the time, and we have a couple of small mementos for you. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thank you to the audience. I'm sorry that we ran out of time. Please feel free to. I'm sure the panelists would be happy if you wrote into them and asked them questions. Look out for our next edition of Vidhi Dialogues. If you'd like to be added to our mailing list, there's it was at the registration desk outside, or otherwise just follow us on Facebook. Thanks again very much for coming.